This video is brought to you by my new book, Cryptid and Other Stories of the Bizarre and Terrifying. If you're looking for something to give you some nightmares before bed, then feel free to check out the links in the description. When it comes to the developer Cyanide, I've always had a positive yet cautious leaning towards trying out their games. For every Styx Shards of Darkness or Call of Cthulhu they made, they also made an Empire or Game of Thrones Genesis, as well as 5 or 6 cycling sims released in between. So when it was announced they were working on a new World of Darkness RPG, adapting Werewolf the Apocalypse, I was optimistic. Since while their best games were never A-grade quality, they had plenty of experience in the RPG genre, with a number of their titles being quite unique in their execution, if also a little janky. In the case of Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood, it falls more into the jank category than the unique category, with a number of flaws that honestly left me perplexed that it had not received more polish before release. The game's narrative revolves around Kahal, a werewolf who went into self-imposed exile after he gave into his rage and killed a friend, returning to his pack to help them bring down the energy company Endron and stop their operation that's destroying the forest they call home and bringing the world one step closer toward the apocalypse. A solid setup that doesn't really lead to anything memorable. The moments worth remembering are things that tie back into the wider lore of the World of Darkness rather than the narrative you experience while playing the game. Like when we meet the Great Spirits guiding 2 different wolf packs. Their designs are metal as F, and it's really memorable when we meet them, but again, this is something that's tied to the World of Darkness lore, rather than something that's exclusive to this story. This problem also carries over to the characters. Kahal himself is flat and can be summed up with this statement: I want to be involved with my daughter. While the other characters are about as deep as a sheet of paper and most of the narrative beats, they can be easily predicted if you have any knowledge of storytelling. On top of all that, there's even a narrative dissonance with the gameplay. A major aspect of Kahal's character and an overarching theme of the story is his struggle with keeping his anger in check. In gameplay, you can build up your anger and rage to go into a berserk mode. So naturally, you'd think that means there's a drawback using it repeatedly, or maybe that the game pulls a Jedi Academy, and that regularly giving into Kahal's anger will affect the ending you get. Nope! We're free to use it all willy-nilly with no impact on Kahal's standing with characters, which begs the question, why anger was made a central theme when it has nothing to do with what you're doing as a player. On the gameplay side of things, the game does fare a lot better. It's divided into 3 core pillars: persuasion, stealth, and combat, and this ties into the mechanics of the tabletop, where Kahal can freely shift between 3 different forms. Persuasion is done in human form, and it's the most basic. It's just picking dialogue options and hope you pick the right one to move on with little fuss. This part of the gameplay is very bare bones and doesn't have a lot to it. Stealth includes the human form and a wolf form. As a man, you perform takedowns and use a crossbow to disable a camera or knock enemies out at a distance. While in wolf form, you use that to move through the areas at a brisker pace and get the drop on enemies. This has a lot more meat on its bones, but when you compare it to the developer's previous work, specifically the Styx games, it still comes off as lacking. But combat is where the real fun of the game is found. This is where the werewolf form comes into play. It's a simple hack and slash setup of chaining light attacks and heavy attacks with the aforementioned rage mode for when you want to make the enemies your bitch. It all works well, and there's a greater deal of depth since you can shift between 2 stands that change how Kahal can fight. The fast stance makes you quick on your feet and also attack faster, while the slow stance lets you hit slower but harder and tear through enemy shields, and which stance you're using also swaps out what special abilities and attacks you can use. Throw in a small but reasonably varied roster of enemies, and you get combat that brought back pleasant memories from high school, playing Hunt of the Reckoning on my stepbrother's Xbox. However, Earthblood's level design can be repetitive at best and mind-numbing at worst. See, every mission in the game in one form or another falls into the same rhythm. You sneak into an area, fulfill an objective or sneak into the next one, sabotage spawn points as you go, and possibly get caught and go into combat mode. Rinse and repeat every single time. Even stuffing up stealth does not affect the next area. The enemies will be oblivious to you regardless if your cover was blown prior, and in the early stages of the game, the repetition on offer and the early lack of enemy variety can really drag down the combat. The mind-numbing repetition of the game's levels is only matched by how bad the presentation can be. Put bluntly, this game can look like arse. Textures can look flat and muddy and come with character models that are distinctly low poly, Cahal being one of the few exceptions to this. It also doesn't help that your hideout hub areas are located right next door to Endron's own base of operations, which begs the question how you haven't been routed yet. The whole thing really looks like a budget title from the early to middle years of the Xbox 360, while at the same time, animations that play in dialogue sequences and cinematics are just atrocious. The best I can describe them is that they just look wrong, with stilted, awkward movements that make them look more like geriatric animatronics rather than a flesh and blood human, alongside facial animations that are practically non-existent. Hell, I can recall characters just talking with only their mouths moving and their eyes never blinking, just staring into my soul.
It'll get you into Hadley's office via the infirmary. You'll find a secret passage into the lab from there.
However, the game does also sport the occasional burst of creativity that offers a glimpse into what could have been if this game had more time in the oven. One was a mission where I first had to sneak into a security recruitment center. Now, to prove to the recruiter I was the right man for the job, I had to answer some questions, and the answers were all things I overheard other people talking about outside of the building. So I had to recall them from memory to proceed, or just go full werewolf and tear shit up. Or when you reach the second half of the game, that's when it starts to experiment with non-linear level design. This is introduced with a mission set in a prison where you have to sneak into a secret lab. This level has multiple objectives you can do in any order. There's nooks and crannies to explore in case you want to go full werewolf to make that option easier, and it was when it felt like Cyanide was really drawing from their past works to spice the game up beyond the usual 1, 2, 3. I also want to point out that the game's theme song kicks ass. It's this nice metal song by Alien Weaponry that's just pure 90s edginess and has a nice tribal sound to it. I can't say much about the rest of the soundtrack, but this song is a nice addition to the game that sticks out. Here, have a listen. That song, the fun combat, and those flashes of creative brilliance are what saves the game from mediocrity and elevates it to the level of just being alright. I cannot say Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood is a must-buy, even for the die-hard fans of the World of Darkness, but if you want something that's mindless, dumb fun, and you're willing to forgive some jank, then when it's on sale, I'd say it's worth a look, if nothing else. Hey, sweet. I know you have numerous other options when it comes to looking into whether or not Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood was worth buying, and I'm so happy you decided to pick my source of information. And if you really liked this video, then feel free to also hit the subscribe button. And for the next game review, I'm going to be doing a Redux review looking at both games by Fulbright Company. And I've also got some backlogged movie reviews that I really need to get caught up on. Anyway, I got all that more coming up, so please stick around.